The Italian insult sliced through the air. Poveretta ignoranti. And in that moment, standing in the gilded heart of Chicago's most exclusive restaurant with a tray of untouched osso buco in her aching hands, Maya Torres had to choose between silence and survival. 48 hours earlier, Aurelio occupied the entire 5th floor of the Hancock Tower, where the reservation list stretched 2 years deep and dinner for two could eclipse $5,000 without wine. The dining room gleamed like the inside of a jewelry box, Venetian plaster walls in pale gold, baccarat crystal chandeliers throwing prisms across calicatum marble floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows framing Lake Michigan's dark expanse far below. The restaurant seated only 40 guests per evening, each one vetted, wealthy, and accustomed to a level of service that verged on telepathic. Maya Torres moved through this temple of excess like a shadow, 24 years old, but carrying the exhaustion of someone twice her age. Her regulation uniform, crisp white shirt, black vest buttoned to her throat, black trousers with a razor crease, hair scraped into a ruthlessly tight chignon, transformed her into functional invisibility. Her hands, chapped from constant washing and scarred from a decade of kitchen work, balanced plates worth more than her weekly paycheck with practiced precision. She had been on her feet for 13 hours already. Her shift had started at 9 that morning with prep work and wouldn't end until past midnight with breakdown. Tomorrow she would do it again at Merchant's, the downtown steakhouse where she pulled weekend doubles. And Thursday nights, she hostessed at Fermentos. 3 jobs, 80-hour weeks, because her 7-year-old brother Raphael's leukemia treatments cost $180,000 annually, and their father's construction salary and bare-bones insurance covered maybe a third of that. 2 years ago, Maya had been a junior at Northwestern University on a full academic scholarship, double majoring in Italian literature and European history. She had spent a transformative semester in Florence, living with a host family in Fiesole, becoming fluent not just in textbook Italian but in the regional dialects, the cultural nuances, the poetry of Dante, and the slang of Tuscan teenagers. She had been positioned for graduate school, for a life of scholarship and teaching. Then Raphael's diagnosis had detonated their family like a bomb. There had been choices, though not really. Experimental treatments not covered by insurance, or watching her baby brother die. Maya had withdrawn from Northwestern, sold everything including her beloved books, and found herself here, refilling water glasses for people who wouldn't notice if she disappeared. Tonight's crowd represented Chicago's apex: real estate moguls, tech billionaires, old manufacturing money, and at table 12, the prime corner position overlooking the lake, sat Harrison Caldwell III, founder and CEO of Caldwell Maritime Holdings, a shipping and logistics empire valued at $6.2 billion. His personal net worth, according to the most recent Forbes calculation, stood at $1.8 billion. Caldwell himself was 53, with silver hair styled in that particular way wealthy men achieved, expensively casual, wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit that had been custom-fitted in London. But Maya's attention, like everyone else's in the restaurant, fixed on his wife. Vivian Caldwell was 41 and looked 30, maintained by a regimen of treatments, procedures, and personal trainers that constituted a full-time job. She wore a white Valentino dress that probably cost more than Maya's annual rent, complemented by a Cartier necklace whose diamonds caught light like trapped stars. Her dark hair fell in perfectly styled waves, her makeup was camera-ready, and her face held an expression of perpetual evaluation, as though everything and everyone existed solely for her judgment. She was also, Maya had learned within 5 minutes of serving their table, spectacularly cruel. "This risotto is overcooked," Vivian had announced in a voice pitched to Carrie, pushing away a plate of saffron risotto that had taken the chef 40 minutes of constant stirring to achieve. "And the wine is too cold. Does anyone here understand proper service?" Maya had apologized, replaced the plate, adjusted the wine. Vivian had found fault with the replacement risotto's presentation. Then the bread wasn't warm enough. Then the lighting was too bright. Each complaint delivered with theatrical sighs and meaningful glances at her husband, performing displeasure for an audience. Harrison Caldwell mostly ignored his wife, focused on his phone and occasional conversation with their dinner companion, a British investor named Philip something, discussing maritime shipping routes with the aggressive efficiency of dealmakers. Now Maya approached their table with the main course. Osso buco for Harrison, branzino for Vivian, lamb for Philip. She moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned that the slightest error could detonate into public humiliation. She set the branzino before Vivian with practiced smoothness. Your Mediterranean seed base, madam, prepared with Ligurian olive oil, fennel, and preserved lemon. Vivian stared at the plate as though Maya had served her a dead animal. Then she looked up at her husband and spoke in rapid, fluent Italian, the Tuscan dialect of educated Florentines, deliberate and cutting. Guarda questa poveretta ignoranti. Probabilmente non ha mai visto un pesce che non venisto in scatola. Puano pensi che assai stupida? Riesa malapena a camminare con quel scarp economish. Look at this pathetic ignorant girl. She's probably never seen a fish that didn't come from a can. How stupid do you think she is? She can barely walk in those cheap shoes. Harrison glanced up from his phone with mild irritation, but said nothing. Philip looked uncomfortable. Around them, other diners continued eating, oblivious to the verbal assault delivered in a language they didn't understand. Vivian's eyes glittered with malicious amusement as she continued in Italian, her voice dripping with contempt. Mi chiedo essi, e capisce anche una parola. Probabilmente pensa che stiamo parlando di quanto è brava. Dio, è così triste. Queste persone sono praticamente animali domestici che servono cibo. I wonder if she understands a single word. She probably thinks we're talking about how good she is at her job. God, it's so pathetic. These people are basically house pets who serve food. Maya stood perfectly still, her face revealing nothing, the plate of branzino still in her hands. Inside her chest, something ancient and furious was waking up, not the desperate, survival-driven part that had sustained her through 2 years of invisible servitude, but the part of herself she had buried. The scholar, the girl who had read Dante in the original, who had debated Machiavelli with Florentine professors, who had loved language with such intensity it had felt like a religious calling. Vivian looked directly at Maya now, speaking slowly in English with exaggerated care, as though addressing a child. You can set the plate down now. Maya set down the branzino with hands that had stopped trembling. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but crystalline clear, in flawless Tuscan Italian that would have earned approval from the Accademia della Crusca itself. Signora Caldwell, la ringrazio per I suoi commenti sulla mia intelligenza e sul mio valore come essere umano. Purtroppo devo correggere la sua un punto. Ho visto molti pesci che non venivano da scatole. Ho anche studiato a Firenze per un anno. Dove ho imparato non solo la sua lingua, ma anche la sua letteratura, la sua storia, e apparentemente più della sua grazia, e buon maniere di quanto lei abbia mai imparato nella sua vita. Mrs. Caldwell, I thank you for your comments about my intelligence and my worth as a human being. Unfortunately, I must correct you on one point. I have seen many fish that didn't come from cans. I also studied in Florence for a year, where I learned not only your language, but also your literature, your history, and apparently more of your grace and good manners than you have ever learned in your entire life. The restaurant went silent. Vivian Caldwell's face underwent a spectacular transformation, shifting from smug amusement to shock to something approaching panic as her brain processed what had just occurred. The color drained from her carefully made-up cheeks, leaving 2 spots of blush standing out like painted circles. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, a fish gasping on a dock. Around them, the cultivated murmur of elite conversation had ceased entirely. Diners at neighboring tables had frozen with forks halfway to mouths, wine glasses suspended in air, all eyes fixed on table 12 where the impossible had just happened. A waitress had responded to mockery in flawless Italian, and her response had been devastating. Harrison Caldwell looked up from his phone for the first time with genuine attention, his expression sharp with interest. Philip, the British investor, was staring at Maya with unconcealed fascination. The sommelier stood paralyzed near the wine station, his professional composure shattered. Vivian recovered with the instinct of someone accustomed to social warfare. Her face hardened, transforming shock into righteous indignation. "How dare you?" she began in English, her voice rising. But Maya was not finished. The floodgates had opened, and 2 years of accumulated humiliation, exhaustion, and suppressed brilliance came pouring out in a river of perfect Italian. Mi scuso se la mia risposta è stata scortese, signora. Ma forse potrei suggerire che si desidera insultar qualcuno nella sua presenza. Sarebbe più saggio assicurarsi prima che quella persona non abbia trascorso un anno studiando Dante, Petrarca, Boccaccio, e Machiavelli all'Università di Firenze? Ho già scritto la mia tesi di laurea sulla evoluzione del dialetto toscano nel Rinascimento. Quindi quando le usa il termine poveretta ignoranti, lo comprendo perfettamente, nel contesto storico, letterario, e personale. I apologize if my response was rude, madam, but perhaps I might suggest that if you wish to insult someone in their presence, it would be wiser to first ensure that person has not spent a year studying Dante, Petrarch, Boccaccio, and Machiavelli at the University of Florence. I also wrote my undergraduate thesis on the evolution of Tuscan dialect during the Renaissance. So when you use the term pathetic ignorant girl, I understand it perfectly, in the historical, literary, and personal context. Vivian's face had progressed from white to red, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Harrison, she hissed at her husband, demanding he defend her, rescue her, restore the natural order where waitresses were mute and wives were obeyed. But Harrison Caldwell was watching Maya with an expression of amused curiosity that clearly infuriated his wife further. When he spoke, it was in Italian, not as fluent as Maya's, but competent, the Italian of business travelers and expensive language tutors. Dove hai studiato esattamente. I perch stai lavorando con vis che usar la tua istruzione. Where exactly did you study? And why are you working here instead of using your education? The question, delivered without mockery, hit Maya harder than Vivian's cruelty had. She felt something crack inside her chest, not anger now, but grief for everything she had lost. I was a scholarship student at Northwestern, she said quietly, switching to English. Double major in Italian literature and European history. I spent my junior year abroad in Florence through the university's partnership with the Università degli Studi. I was planning to pursue a doctorate in Renaissance studies. She paused, her exhausted face revealing nothing. Then my 7-year-old brother was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. His treatments cost $180,000 a year. I made a choice. The silence that followed was different from before, not entertained or shocked, but deeply, painfully human. Several women at nearby tables had visible tears. Even Philip looked stricken. Vivian, however, had found her footing again. Her face twisted into something ugly, defensive. Cruelty masquerading as moral authority. So you eavesdrop on private conversations and humiliate guests? That's your solution to your problems? You should be fired. She turned to her husband. Harrison, I want her fired. Immediately, Harrison Caldwell set down his phone with deliberate care. When he looked at his wife, his expression was colder than Maya had yet seen. Vivian, you insulted her first. In a language you assumed she wouldn't understand. That's not a private conversation. That's cowardice. Vivian's mouth fell open. You're taking her side? Over your wife's. I'm taking the side of basic human decency, which you seem to have misplaced somewhere between your last Botox appointment and this dinner. Harrison's voice was quiet, but edged with steel. He turned to Maya. Miss, I didn't catch your name. Maya Torres, sir. Miss Torres, I apologize for my wife's behavior. It was unconscionable. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook, an actual checkbook, something Maya hadn't seen in years. He wrote quickly, tore off the check, and held it out to her. This is for your brother's treatments. Consider it an apology for. He gestured at Vivian. This. Maya stared at the check. The amount was $200,000. $200,000, enough to cover more than a year of Raphael's care. Enough to let her sleep at night without calculating which bills to pay and which to defer. Her hands trembled as she took it. Sir, I can't. You can, Harrison said firmly. And you will. Because watching you dismantle my wife's cruelty in perfect Renaissance Italian was worth considerably more than that to me. He glanced at Vivian, whose face had gone white again. I've been married to her for 6 years. This is the first time I've seen someone actually stand up to her bullying. It was educational. Vivian stood abruptly, her chair scraping against marble. I'm leaving. Are you coming, Harrison, or are you staying here to fawn over the help? Harrison didn't stand. I'm staying. Philip and I have business to discuss. You can take the car. I'll Uber home later. Vivian's face contorted through rage, humiliation, disbelief. She grabbed her Hermes clutch and stalked toward the exit, her heels striking the marble like gunshots. The restaurant watched her departure in absolute silence. After she disappeared, Harrison turned back to Maya. Miss Torres, are you still interested in Renaissance studies? Or has life beaten that dream out of you entirely? Maya clutched the check, her mind reeling. Ah yes, I think about it every day. But Raphael needs me. My family needs the income. Harrison nodded slowly. What if I told you there might be a way to have both? Maya stood frozen, the check for $200,000 trembling in her hands while her mind struggled to process Harrison Caldwell's question. Around them, the restaurant had begun to resume its normal rhythm. Cautious conversation, the careful clink of silverware, but she could feel every eye still tracking their table. Harrison gestured to Vivian's empty chair. Sit down for a moment, Miss Torres. Please. Sir, I'm working. I can't. You can if I say you can. He looked past her to where the sommelier still stood, paralyzed by the social catastrophe that had erupted in his dining room. Gerard, right? Miss Torres is taking a 10-minute break at my table. Please send someone to cover her station. Gerard nodded mutely, too shocked to protest this violation of every service protocol. Maya sat, her posture rigid, acutely aware of the transgression. Waitstaff didn't sit with billionaire guests. Harrison turned to Philip, the British investor who had been watching the entire scene with fascination. Philip, you're still looking for someone to direct the cultural programming for the Florence project, correct? Philip blinked, then understanding crossed his face. Yes, actually. We've interviewed 8 candidates, all of them underwhelming. We need someone who genuinely understands Renaissance art and literature, not just someone who took a semester abroad and can order coffee in Italian. Harrison looked back at Maya. Philip's foundation is endowing a new Renaissance Studies Center in Florence. Museum, library, research facilities. They need a director of academic programming who can curate exhibitions, develop educational content, and interface with Italian institutions. Salary is $120,000, plus housing in Florence and full benefits. The position starts in 6 months. Maya's breath caught. Sir, I appreciate the gesture, but I can't move to Italy. My brother needs expensive ongoing treatment that American healthcare has decided he doesn't deserve at any reasonable price, Harrison finished. Yes, I'm aware. He pulled out his phone, typed rapidly, then showed her the screen. I'm also on the board of St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. They specialize in pediatric cancer. Treatment there is free, completely free. They cover everything: procedures, medications, travel, housing for families. I just sent an email to their director of admissions. Raphael Torres will have a spot in their leukemia program within 2 weeks. The room tilted. Maya gripped the edge of the table, her exhausted mind unable to process what she was hearing. That's not. You can't just. How is that possible? It's possible because I donate $8 million annually to St. Jude, and because your brother deserves treatment that doesn't bankrupt your family. Harrison's voice was matter of fact. The Florence position doesn't start for 6 months. That gives you time to get Raphael into treatment, ensure he's stable, and finish your bachelor's degree at Northwestern. I spoke with the university president last month about an unrelated donation. I'll call him tomorrow about reinstating your scholarship. Philip leaned forward, his British accent warm with enthusiasm. Miss Torres, I should mention that the Florence position also includes funding for you to pursue a doctorate while you work. The foundation partners with several universities. If you're interested. Maya's vision blurred. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to hold back tears that came from some place deeper than gratitude, from the sudden, overwhelming relief of discovering that hope was not actually dead, just dormant. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this? Harrison was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost its corporate efficiency, revealing something more human underneath. Because 6 years ago, I married a woman who was beautiful and charming and utterly devoid of empathy. I've watched her treat service workers, assistants, anyone she considers beneath her, with casual cruelty. I've made excuses, looked away, told myself it wasn't my responsibility to correct her. He gestured at Vivian's empty chair. Tonight, a 24-year-old waitress with a dying brother showed more courage and grace than I've managed in 6 years of marriage. That's humbling. Consider this my attempt to be slightly less of a coward. He stood, buttoning his Tom Ford jacket. The check I gave you is yours, no strings attached. Use it however you need, debt, rent, whatever Raphael needs in the interim before St. Jude. Philip will contact you tomorrow about the Florence position. You can decide if you want it. He paused. And Miss Torres, your Italian is extraordinary. Don't let it die serving osso buco to people who don't deserve your talent. He dropped a $1,000 bill on the table, payment for a meal Vivian had barely touched, and walked toward the exit with Philip following. Maya sat alone at table 12, holding a check that would save her brother's life and a future she had thought was buried forever. Gerard approached cautiously, his professional composure tentatively restored. Maya, I don't know what just happened, but you should probably go. Take the rest of the night off. Take tomorrow off. Take the week off. Maya stood on shaking legs. Around her, the restaurant's other diners were applauding, a slow clap that built into sustained applause, wealthy strangers celebrating a moment of justice they had witnessed. Several approached to shake her hand, to tell her she was magnificent, to slip her their cards with whispered offers of help. She walked out of Aurelio at 10:23 p.m., 7 hours before her shift was supposed to end. She walked out with a check for $200,000 in her pocket, a job offer in Florence waiting, and her brother's death sentence commuted to a future of possibility. That night, she sat at Raphael's bedside in their cramped Pilsen apartment and told him a story in Italian, Dante's Inferno, translated into language a 7-year-old could understand, about a journey through darkness toward light. Raphael, bald from chemotherapy and exhausted from his latest treatment, listened with fierce attention. Do we get to see light? He asked when she finished. Maya held her baby brother's hand and smiled for the first time in 2 years. Yeah, Rafi, I think maybe we do. 6 months later, Maya Torres stood in the Palazzo Medici in Florence, giving her first lecture as director of academic programming for the Renaissance Studies Center. Her Italian had returned to full fluency. Raphael was in remission at St. Jude. And somewhere in Chicago, Vivian Caldwell was presumably still underestimating waitresses. Maya had learned that invisibility was sometimes a choice, and visibility, true, brilliant, defiant visibility, was worth the risk of being seen.